Um, First of all, May, thank you very much for inviting me.
Our honor to have
Like, I'm thrilled to be here, and before I forget, I would also like to thank the interpreter, because I was listening to the discussion through the interpreter, and since everybody spoke very fast, my heart went out to her because she could barely catch up with the speed of the discussion, but they were marvelous. Now, who am I and what have I? Like this?
Yes, this is perfect.
Okay, thank you. Who am I and what have I done in the 7 decades of my life? First of all, it's wonderful to see the next generation of activist women. These young, energetic women are really warming to my heart, and a couple of my colleagues with whom I have been working in Lebanon and in the region for a number of decades. I was born in Iran. My mother was Austrian, my father Iranian, so I grew up from the very beginning with two cultures who were very different. I mean, you know, my mother was a very disciplinary person, and the Iranian side of my family was very laissez-faire, so you did what you want. I grew up speaking German and Persian, and then I went to a French school, École Jeanne d'Arc. I think the equivalent exists here. And so the first language I learned to read and write was French, because I spoke German and I spoke Persian, but I didn't know how to read or write either of these languages. But then I learned Persian, and eventually when I went to Austria, I started learning to read and write in German. Anyway, I studied journalism and did history of art and philosophy, came back to Iran, and my first job was as a journalist. And let me tell you an anecdote, what it was like to be a woman journalist then in Iran. I joined the foreign news section of the most important and largest daily paper in Tehran. And the first thing I heard was a colleague telling another colleague, you know, does this weakling know anything? Because I was the first woman who had joined the paper, and they even didn't have any facilities for women. So once you entered the paper, you were doomed and stuck there till you went home without a place even to wash your hands. But and I thought to myself that day, boy, am I going to show you who that weakling is. And within a matter of a year, I became the foreign news editor of the paper. That taught me a lesson. If you are serious about your work, you will excel, no matter what the impediments are, no matter how difficult it is going to be. And that was an ordinary colleague of mine, an Iranian journalist who had not worked with a woman journalist. Today, there are, I think, more women journalists in Iran than men journalists. My next encounter, something very similar, was I was covering the trip of the then head of state of Iran to Finland. And on the plane, I had asked to interview the president of Finland, Kekkonen. And as I walked into the special section, I overheard the then head of state of Iran asking the foreign minister, she wants to interview in Persian. She wants to interview Kekkonen. Does she know anything? And I thought to myself, I'm going to interview Kekkonen in German where you can't follow me, because if I had spoken to him in English or French, he would have followed me. So that was another lesson I learned. Anyway, after that, I joined, while I was still a journalist, I decided I need to work on women's issues, joined the Women's Organization of Iran, and was part of a team who drafted the first personal status law in Iran, which became one of the most important documents that we ever had. We can talk about it later. Then came the revolution. I left Iran, and we went to Princeton, and we had to start from scratch. So at Princeton, I started teaching Persian language and literature, and occasionally courses in women's studies on women in the Middle East and Iran. Then we moved to Washington, and I joined a think tank, which is one of the best think tanks in Washington, the Wilson Center, and I became the founder and the first director of their Middle East program. And I thought to myself, okay, this is the Middle East, and Washington is a very political city. Nobody deals with women's issues in the Middle East. So I started a very active women's program, and I knew that alone I can't do anything. I reached to my colleagues in the region. One of them, Fatma Speiti Qasem, was then at ESQA. We worked together. Hanan Saab was when we started bringing in women entrepreneurs. I stayed in that job for 20 years. In between, I would go regularly and visit Iran, and I had a short stay in Iran, which was the short stay was in January 2007. It became a long stay because I was kept under country arrest for 8 months, of which I spent 105 days in solitary confinement. Oh. So this is the nutshell. It's a bit too long. It's a very big nut.
Yes, I will come back to it. This is a good incentive for the journalists that are here, because you started as a journalist. You know, we used to have a president, President Charles Hello, who used to say, who was a journalist, and he used to say, journalists can lead to anything, but the thing is to get out of it.
I got out on time.
Yeah. I don't know when the first time you visited the region. I'd like to have your first impression, this helicopter view on this woman issue. Do you see any pattern, any trend? Do you see any evolution in terms of women advancing towards more participation, mainly in the political field?
If I'm not mistaken, my first visit to the region regarding women's issues was coming to Lebanon and bringing a group of Iraqi women to Beirut. They were the newly elected parliamentarian, and my vivid memory of that meeting was that there was, a divide between them. We had a group of Sunni Iraqi members of parliament and Shiite Iraqi members of parliament. So I remember inviting the Shiite group, because I come from Iran, and have a small meeting with them and telling them that you have to work together as women. Forget about what party affiliation you have. You need to build a caucus and work together, otherwise you will be doomed if you continue only voting with your party. You are in parliament because you are women. The Iraqi constitution has a quota system, 25% are women. And so this opportunity is given to you on a tray. Make use of that opportunity. And our meetings were at Esqua, and it was very hard to keep everybody together. But I was very hopeful. They were a group of young people, and I thought, okay, they will get somewhere.
Dr. Hali, do you agree with the statement that the number one issue in the Arab world is about women and women's rights and women participation, and there is no Arab Spring to succeed if this is not achieved?
Look, I think I agree with you, but I also think that the number one issue in the whole world, especially in the developing world, is the problem of women. And looking at the Arab world, looking at the region as a whole, I think that we have come a long way from when I started. And look at the level of education. It is unbelievable. The progress in education has been by leaps and bounds. But unfortunately, what is important now is employment. And education for us, when I say us, I'm looking at myself as a person from the region. Education does not necessarily lead to employment. So I think we have passed beyond the stage of having problem with education, but what we should do now is to tackle the issue of drawing more and more women into the field of employment. And I think we know why it is difficult for women to get employment, regardless of whether they are educated or less educated. It's still the nature of our societies, patriarchal society, culture and custom. And also, at the end of the day, I think both the private sector and the public sector feels more comfortable, still more comfortable hiring men. But then there is a big change. Because of the economic situation, you see young families are becoming two breadwinners. And that, I think, is a hopeful sign.
This leads me to the next question about the real drivers for change. Are they economical, or are they more related to political reforms? And I'm asking this question because just to get from you what we have to focus on, given that the energy and resources are few, and if you have to focus on one thing, this key element, this key factor of success, what will it be?
Look, when it comes to political issue, we have made some progress. If you look at the ranking of political participation, the global ranking of political participation in the MENA region, some of the countries are doing relatively well. For example, Algeria, or the UAE, they are doing well. I think if you facilitate for women access, more access to political leadership, they will facilitate the access of women to employment.
You are in favor of a quota?
Yeah, I'm 100% favor of a quota system, but I think for a limited number of years. Yes, I mean, let's say 4 parliamentary terms, because one of the problems still is that our men politicians are not used to work with women. So if you have a quota system, like you have it in Tunisia or in Morocco, for example, or in Jordan, if you have 150 members of parliament and you have 40 women sitting there and talking about their ideas and pushing for change, because women really want change. And I know there was earlier a question about corruption. My sense is that women are very good at reining in corruption. And you hear very few stories about women being corrupt when it comes to politics and so on. So I think the presence of women will make a change. And a study that was done at the Wilson Center, they were doing a program with 50 countries. They noticed that if you have women in leadership position, automatically the GDP of the country raises by 6%. I think this was also referred to by the panel of our diplomats. One of the ambassadors mentioned that.